During the Cold War, the Soviet Union sent some of its brightest and best to the United States to infiltrate, gather intel, basically spy on their adversary. The trick was to pass off as Americans deep undercover, just like that TV series, The Americans. And that was Jack Barsky's life. In a moment, we speak to the former KGB spy himself. But first, Basil Rehan tells us more about his incredible story.
For more than a decade, Jack Barsky lived undercover in the US posing as an American citizen. In truth, he was a KGB operative on a mission to infiltrate the US political establishment.
Said something about getting stuff from level 4.
We'll have to.
The Soviet Union referred to sleeper agents like Barsky as illegals. The practice is depicted in the TV series The Americans.
Young Hee from Mary Kay. Of course.
Jack Barsky was born Albrecht Dietrich in Soviet East Germany. In 1969, he was a college senior majoring in chemistry when he was recruited by the KGB. Nearly 10 years later, after intensive training, Barsky arrived in New York City to assume his new false identity. For the next decade, he lived a double life, one as an American in the US, another in East Germany, where he would visit his wife and young son. In the US, Barsky worked a normal 9-to-5 job, had friends, hobbies, all the while being in regular contact with his KGB handlers. Barsky never succeeded in accomplishing his mission. Instead, he inadvertently realized the American dream. In 1988, when the KGB thought his cover was blown, they told him to come home. But by then, Barsky was married in the US, with a young daughter who was unknown to his handlers. Forced to decide between his two lives, he risked it all to stay in America. And for almost a decade, he lived a quiet life, no longer spying for the KGB. His cover was finally blown in 1997, after an argument with his second wife in which he revealed his true identity. The FBI had been listening in, and they showed up at his door soon after. In exchange for Barsky's cooperation, he was allowed to stay in the country, and became a legal US citizen. He's published a memoir about his incredible life story. It's a seemingly lifelong lucky streak, so unlikely you might call it a miracle.
Jack Barsky, thank you so much for joining us on the InnerView. I was set to interview you in person. I was on my way, and then United canceled my flight to Austin. So my theory is that there's an FSB or KGB spy working for United Airlines, and they're trying to keep us apart.
I wouldn't be surprised. There's always Russian interference.
Well, I'm glad we finally got to do this. You have an amazing story. You're one of the most interesting people that I have come across in my research, in my hopes to get good people on the program. And one of the things that constantly comes to mind is that it seems almost miraculous that you were able to evade detection for so long, for decades. Did it feel miraculous to you?
Not while I was evading detection, but in hindsight, absolutely. I had about 4 or 5 situations where I either was really, really good at reacting to a danger, or I got just damn lucky. I was meant to survive this, and I was meant to, talk to you today as an American citizen. So I believe in a higher power, and there had to have been some intervention because I'm not Irish. I'm not that lucky.
If I had to tell the young version of you growing up on the other side of the Iron Curtain that you wouldn't technically defect, but you would be on the other side. You'd be an American citizen. You'd tell the story, warts and all, and you'd be open to talking to the Americans and the world about your story. What would that young Jack, well, your name wasn't Jack back then, what would that young version of you tell me?
Impossible. No way. I never, growing up, I never had a thought that one day I would be a spy or a secret undercover agent or something like that. My life really was shaped by others. People brought ideas to me, and I could make a decision, yes or no. And at every turning point, other people made decisions that impacted my life. For instance, the woman that I married in the U.S., decided she would have a child. And that changed my life, because the reason that the reason that I stayed in the U.S. was against all odds, was because I fell in love with that child, and on there, and it keeps on going. And then I'm so aware that when I think or thought I was in control, I wasn't. There was always somebody else who was doing something, or didn't do something that had an impact on my life, and it's still happening.
Yeah, tell me a bit more about those tangled allegiances. You talk about it, I mean, it's on the title of your book, right? Secret Life, Tangled Allegiances. It wasn't only about two nations, two powers. It was also about two women, two families.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
And so one of them was more of a girlfriend, and I married her because I felt for her. She was illegal in the country, and she had already paid a fellow to marry her, and then file for citizenship, or a green card at least. And this guy took the money and ran. And she was a very pleasant woman. She was very, very. She was beautiful, and a very good companion for me, because she was safe. She wasn't. If I had seriously dated a born American, they would have figured out that something is not quite right about me. So instinctively, again, she was right. I was deeply in love with my German wife. She knew what I was doing, where I was going, but not any details. And she told me, "I'll wait for you." And so the thought was about 10 years, about 10, 11, a dozen years. And I was committed to going back and be with her. But the love for this child, not the other woman, was greater. It overwhelmed me. And so again, and I've said this multiple times, the one thing I regret in my entire life is having betrayed my German wife. But at least, the mitigating circumstances, I didn't do it for another woman.
And was it tied into the guilt that you had about having to lie for a living, having to live a double life?
No.
No?
No. No, then I don't feel guilty about that. It was something I had to do because, you know that I joined the KGB because there was a lot of personal incentives, but the foundation was my ideology. I was a strong believer in communism, and you did what you have to do to help the world revolution to happen, and the workers' paradise on the planet to be established. And I believed in this.
It seems as if this interview is about love, because tell me about falling out of love with Soviet communism then.
Yeah. So it started when I had my first job in the U.S. economy, not the very first job as a professional. After having graduated with a college degree in the U.S., I started working as a computer programmer for an insurance company. And in those days, insurance companies were very paternalistic, and it felt almost like going home. Because the communist state of East Germany was very, very paternalistic. They pretty much, quote unquote, took care of you if you did a good job. And so the same thing happened at MetLife, and I felt like going home. But the one thing I knew pretty quickly, that the work environment was different. Capitalism made people a whole lot more productive, and the experience I had in the working environment, I had some time spending in the workplace, was that nobody really was incentivized to work hard. A lot of people were just lazy, didn't do anything, and they got paid anyway. So I knew at that point that something had to change in the communist world. And maybe Gorbachev had the same idea, but in those days, there was a theory that was shopped around by socialist parties within the West, and it was called the convergence theory, which meant that the good pieces of communism and capitalism would merge and result in what we actually have in some Western countries now is a welfare state. And I thought that was a good idea. And a funny thing is that my last visit to Moscow, the fellow who picked me up from the airport volunteered that convergence theory is probably the way to go. And this guy didn't have a thought, and a creative thought of his own. He was just mouthing off what other people told him. And I guarantee you there were people within the KGB and within the Soviet government that wanted to go that way. So that was step one. Step two was when the wall came down, and I said, what happened there? And then I did research, and then the Soviet Union a year later fell apart. I did more research, and I found out about all the lies that we had been fed, and that the biggest hero in my mind that I had was Vladimir Lenin, who led the October Revolution, was a killer, and I read some unredacted writings by Mr. Lenin. And I realized communism was based on a huge lie, and it wasn't just Stalin, it was Lenin, it was everybody. And so, just to finish this up, I had the luxury of slow decontamination. My contemporaries in East Germany, when the wall came down, it felt like they were hit on the head with a 2x4. And they still have not, a lot of them have not been able to digest that change. It was too radical.
Jack, did you actually damage people? Did you destroy people's lives during your time as a spy?
If I did, I wouldn't know. Certainly, I never did anything with my hands. Okay, I had no weapons training, this kind of stuff. I did not explode things. So if I damaged somebody, that would be somebody that might have been recruited, because I primarily worked as a spotter, and I had a few other tasks. But my hands and I had never touched a secret document. My eyes never looked at a secret document. The most important thing, which is I didn't found out until much later. The KGB never told me. The most important thing for them was my living in the United States, because just like as an illegal, waiting for possibly when diplomatic relations would be terminated, and as you know, in those days, all the KGB agents except for us illegals were diplomats.
Yeah.
And so there would have been at one point, if that happened, I would have gotten instructions, but I was not prepared for that. I met a friend of mine he was an illegal also German, and he had no task, not a single task. They just told him, just live like an American.
So you were serving the Soviet Union. I guess from my understanding, what you were doing in many ways would be termed data harvesting in today's terminology, right? You were scooping up a lot of people's data, passing it on, in addition to other tasks, yeah? So, I mean, if you had to quantify how much damage do you think you did to the evil American empire as an agent on the ground?
Very little. That I have no proof of any damage fundamentally, and obviously I can't say I didn't do any, because this is the unknown. I can't prove the negative. But in the scheme of things, compared to say Aldrich Ames and Robert Hansen, who did phenomenal damage to the United States with regard to espionage and collecting information that would have helped the Soviet Union to get the upper hand on the United States. Very little.
When your cover was blown, and I'll ask you a bit more about that in a moment, but when it was blown, were you tempted to fully defect, switch to the other side, and start doing work for the other side?
Oh, absolutely. I at that point, I volunteered. You know, this there
Is
was
that
no
what kept you out of
discomfort.
jail? Is that what kept you out of jail?
You bet, and it also kept damage away from my family.
Right.
You know, I had two children and a wife, and I was a family man. But I had absolutely no qualms. You know, because communism had disappeared, the German Democratic Republic didn't exist anymore. There was no loyalty left in me to that old communist thinking. So, and you know, I already had established my version of the American dream, and it was a comfortable life, and I felt good about it. I wasn't 100% American. That changed over time. 9/11 made me emotionally into an American, and what made me intellectually an American finally was I took an online course on the American Constitution. And I call myself a constitutionalist. This is the best document ever written in the history of how to establish a state that functions well.
So when you see other people, they might not be CIA agents who defect, but other Americans who lose hope in the American dream, and they look back at the history of American crimes, and they look at Vietnam, and they look at the things done in the name of US empire, and they fall out of love with America in the same way that you fell out of love with the Soviet Union, just the inverse of it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do understand that it is possible to fall out of love with the current United States. Greed has taken over, and we are looking more and more like an oligarchy, where like huge companies are involved with a lot of money in politics, and the vote of the people is being distorted by lots and lots of propaganda, whether that be from the left or the right. I don't care. It's fundamentally equal, and I am very much concerned, and that's based on my experience having worked in large corporations, with the size of the federal government, which has increased since World War II under every president, including Ronald Reagan, and in big hierarchies, pyramidal hierarchies, are inefficient, ineffective, to put it mildly, but they can also turn evil, because when they become political, and the best politicians wind up on top, and they're not necessarily the best leaders, and they're not necessarily the ones that have the good of the people that are being governed in mind. So I'm concerned about that. This is not a political statement, it's a philosophical statement.
So the handler that was working with you felt that your cover was blown. The Soviets felt that your cover was blown. They instructed you via various methods and signs, one on the subway, to go home. You didn't want to go home. You were comfortable. You were happy.
Well, I was
no. So correct me.
Torn.
You were torn.
I was on the one hand, if I stay, it sounds like a defection, and they might come after me. On the one hand, if I stay, the FBI actually will put me in jail. On the other hand, there was this little girl, and it went back and forth and back and forth. And the moment I made the decision, it came from my subconscious. It just like, there was a point when and it happens to me a lot, that the subconscious sort of communicates to the conscious mind, and at that point it says, I'm staying. And it was not the result of a rational thought. Okay, it was insanely courageous and reckless fundamentally, because there was a good chance that the KGB was right, and there was some chance that when I told them I'm not coming home, that they would come after me. So it worked out.
And you told them that it's going to be of extreme difficulty to get back home because, and you
Because I
lied
have
here,
AIDS.
because you have AIDS.
Yes.
You told them you have AIDS. Tell us more.
Yeah, that was that was a brilliant lie.
Amazing.
Because in those days, HIV/AIDS was a death sentence. And I thought that was my only hope. And they had no reason not to believe this lie because they knew that everything good for me personally was back over there at home. And I was known to be a brutally honest person because I was always very open with them, sharing mistakes that I made that only I knew about. Now, what I didn't share with them was the mistake that I got married and the mistake that a child was born into that marriage. So I kept some stuff from them, but the way they assessed me in the beginning and during my early years, there was always brutal honesty coming from me. So it worked. I didn't know it would, but I got feedback from my son many years later that they went to my family and told them that I'm dead.
And what's your relationship like with your son?
He calls me dad.
Amazing. Well, that's good. That's a
Yeah.
start.
Yeah. And we are very much alike. He inherited a lot of my odd sense of humor. He is a very bright person. He studied chemistry like I did without knowing that his father was a chemist. And he's very athletic, and he married a beautiful blonde woman that looks a lot like his mother.
And so in this crazy world that we live in right now, after Russia invaded Ukraine, no doubt there'll be lots of intel wars going on. What would be happening? I mean, you could hazard a guess here. I know that you probably don't know exactly what's happening, but what would the what would the Barsky equivalents be doing right now?
Well, let me tell you something, and I have not heard this, have not heard any one of the so-called experts come up with that idea. I guarantee you there are undercover agents on behalf of Ukraine in the Russian government, and there are undercover agents on behalf of Russia and the Ukrainian governments. And whatever intelligence comes one way or the other is not reliable. And so when Putin makes mistakes, that may well be because he has been misinformed, and it's also partially because he doesn't like bad news, and that's typically when you're at the very top and you're a real strong man. I don't know about Zelensky, but you don't believe people that will tell you bad news. But the intelligence world in the Ukrainian war is the extreme of what we call the wilderness of mirrors, where you really don't know the truth.
So if we hear about an intelligence estimate that comes from the CIA or MI5 or MI6 or any one of those organizations, it's quite likely to be wrong in your opinion.
What do they know? That's speculation. We don't have any active agents in those countries. Where we have diplomats, we still have diplomatic relations with Russia, and we have it with Ukraine. But they're being fed information by the ones that claim that they know. So I don't trust anything. When that's coming out of that area, when the head of the Wagner Group was told in the media, and everybody knew that he wound up in Belarus because the Belarusian president said he was there. And I was interviewed on television, and I said, I don't believe it. I want to see proof. And it turns out he wasn't.
Yeah. Jack, what do you want people to learn from your story?
Oh, it's always this three-word sentence that is part of my motto, because I lived through it, and I'm living proof that love conquers all. And This is the essence of being human. It's to love, and also to love people that you don't necessarily like, because when you exude nothing but love, it comes back to you, and it's a sort of a selfish endeavor, you know. If you're loving, somebody will love you back, or sometimes they don't, but it doesn't matter, because the negative emotions are out of your system. It's all about positivity towards other human beings, and it took me a long time to get there, but I'm there today, and I feel for the first time in my life, I feel very comfortable in my own skin. So that's it.
Jack Barsky, the spy who loved me and everyone else. Thanks so much for the conversation. I really appreciate it, Jack. I wish you all the best.
Very well. And that was a good interview. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.